Jason, I like the way the film starts, that it doesn't, at first you don't know Dmitri's a boxer, like the opening scene. Talk a little bit about how you open the film, because I think that was very well done.
Yeah. Um, well, the opening of the film is Dmitry driving in the car, and he's listening to a CD, a lecture by a rabbi. And to me, what the rabbi is saying in that lecture really fits Dmitry's story, and it's a good way for the film and the journey to begin. And it's a rabbi giving a lecture about Jewish history, and he's speaking about how history is really, or Jewish history is really a history of individuals who have choices, and that the choices they make have consequences, and those consequences are what we call history. So really the film then gets started with us sort of just seeing Dmitry visually, and him hearing this lecture and us hearing this lecture about Jewish history, and which blatantly says that it's all about individuals who have choices, and choices they make create history. And the journey that you see in the film for 80 minutes is really about the choices that Dmitry has made in his life and the events that have taken place and the history that he is making by being both a boxer and a religious Jew.
Also, you introduce an important character in the very next scene. Talk a little bit about that. It's a nice segment.
Well, Jimmy O'Farrow, I think, is probably one of the more interesting people that's ever probably been committed to film. I mean, it wasn't my gift to the cinema. I mean, it's just that I was in the right place to bring Jimmy into this film, and hopefully people will get to see him. I mean, Jimmy is just one of these really authentic New York City characters. He's a gym manager who founded the Starrett City Boxing Club in 1978 and has been running it for the last 30 years. It's produced all kinds of New York City Gold Glove champions, amateur national champions, and world champion boxers, including Dmitry. And in that second scene, we're sort of introduced to Jimmy very organically in his office in the Starrett City Boxing Gym. And we get a good glimpse at sort of how boxers get started in the sport, and it usually just starts with a young kid calling up the gym to get information, just as Dmitry did when he was 13 years old. I was there filming with Jimmy when a 13-year-old kid just happened to call and to get information, and Jimmy just goes in that opening sequence with the credits. Jimmy is speaking to this young man just as he would speak to every single person, the thousands of kids who've called the gym, including Dmitry, which of course we don't see because my film starts with Dmitry at age 19. But we get to see Jimmy speaking on the phone just as you spoke to Dmitry and thousands of other kids, saying, this is what happens, this is what we do in here. There's rules in here that are different than the rules on the street. These rules and regulations, help you, and you could end up using them for the rest of your life. And I think they've clearly, obviously if you continue to be a boxer, they affect you. They create a discipline and almost a religion to your life, with rules that you live your life by. And then, of course, that's intercut with Dmitry running on the beach and praying in the synagogue. And the rules and regulation and discipline that govern boxers and boxing are not incredibly different from those that govern principled and religious Jews or anyone living by any other religious codes.
Yeah, you make the parallels between the two, boxing and between Orthodox Judaism, quite well. When did those occur to you, actually? Is it you making the film?
The parallels?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely, in making the film, you definitely start to see the parallels. But you read about boxing, you learn about the sport. You really do see that in order to be a good boxer, it requires an incredible amount of discipline. And there are sets of rules that boxers live their lives by in terms of their training regimen, in terms of the teachings that are given by every single trainer in every single gym in America and around the world. It's the same wherever you go. And you start to understand that it is a set of beliefs and a system to live your life by. But to be perfectly honest, this was all really hit home when a friend of mine back in Brooklyn told me about this great academic named Loic Vacant, who's actually a sociologist here in Berkeley. And Loic wrote his dissertation in sociology at the University of Chicago. He did a participatory ethnographic study of a boxing gym in the south side of Chicago, where he went into this gym, and for 3 years he became a boxer. And while he was becoming a boxer and training essentially for the Golden Gloves, he was also researching the socioeconomic culture of the people that inhabit this gym and how it works. And he went on to write, he's written a lot about boxing, and he talks about boxing as being a religion. And he talks about everything that goes into boxing, and he really does it quite eloquently. And I've just read a little bit of his writings, and I listened to an interview of his with the BBC, a radio interview that was on the internet. And I'm hoping that he might make it to the Berkeley screening, but I think he's a great resource. And as an academic who also became a boxer, I mean, I don't think there's anyone probably more qualified to sort of discuss it academically than Loïc Vacant.
Talk about meeting Dmitriy. How you guys met?
Shortly after I learned about Dmitry from reading an article in the Washington Post, that was from September 1st, 2002, I had moved to Brooklyn about 6 months earlier and was looking for a new documentary project. And you know, I was an athlete growing up, a really competitive soccer player, and I read this article about Dmitry and the characters like Jimmy and Israel and Bob Arum, who were involved in Dmitry's life and helping him live both a religious and professional boxing life. And I had known a Chabad rabbi, and Dmitry was involved with Chabad in Brooklyn, and I knew a Chabad rabbi from college, so I called him and I said, could you make the introduction for me? And then I called up Dmitry's rabbi, or he called me, and then I said, can I come out and meet you guys? And I met with Dmitry and his rabbi, and I told him my style of filmmaking, which is very non-aggressive, and it's just sort of a fly on the wall. And next thing you know, I was running around with Dmitry at the gym and in the synagogue and out to Las Vegas. So
talk about that fly on the wall. Other people have mentioned that it became invisible, and it's so important to what happens.
I mean, I think so. The style of documentary filmmaking that I'm interested in is cinema verite, or direct cinema, which is, you know, pioneered by D.A. Pennebaker and the Maysles brothers, you know, back in the early '60s and late '60s. And when I saw some of their films in college, I just knew that was the kind of films that I wanted to make. You know, films that showed non-fiction subjects, but just showed it in such an interesting way and in such a colorful way that it was every bit as exciting as a narrative feature. And so instead of seeing a lot of talking heads, like, you're really seeing who these people are and how they live by being with them and running around with them. And the camera is just sort of part of that scenery, and it's just picking up these people and not necessarily hearing people talk about these characters or hearing them talk about themselves as much as you are just sort of seeing who they are. And that's sort of what I do, and that's what I did with Dmitry. Is for the first few years, I really just I told him, I'm not going to ask you a lot of questions. Eventually, though, in making a longitudinal documentary where it's going to be 3 years, you do need to fill in gaps, and you do need to ask certain questions. And I would love to have made the film without any interviews, but in order for the audience to understand certain things that are going on, you really do have to incorporate some interviews, and so that's what I did.
You need this fly on the wall that requires an awful lot of coverage, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's an awful lot of hours. An hour.
Barbara Koppel sometimes.
Sure, she's exactly. Barbara Koppel also does great cinema verite work, and her films, of course, have been really popular and critically acclaimed, and she's won a couple of Academy Awards. It's the same thing. I mean, there's such drama in everyday life, and you don't necessarily always need to script it, and you don't really need people talking about it, talking to the camera about it. For me, it's much more interesting to capture that drama organically and to show people, you know, sort of cultures and lives the way they are, the way they're lived. And it does require a lot of patience. I mean, there are days where you shoot, and you know, you shoot hours of footage and you might not use anything from those hours and hours and hours of tape. But eventually you do have things that just that make it into the film, and that's what you use.
What's the most unexpected thing that you came across by that technique? That you wouldn't have expected it to be?
Well, I mean, there's lots of everything is a surprise when you're just sort of hanging around with your camera, and you are essentially writing the script as you go. You know, like your shots and your dailies or whatever. Those are your script notes, and then you write the script really in the editing room. But so you're surprised every day. You never know when you're going to get something good that you're going to use, and sometimes you think you got something great that you're going to use, and you might not ever use it. But what's great is, like, you know, there are days where you're just like, oh, I'm going to put away the camera and it's going to be done. And then you tell yourself, no, I'm going to keep it out. You keep the camera out. And there's a lot of times where just like you kept the camera and you stuck around for those extra couple of hours and you got something. You know, so it's really, there's no rhyme or reason. You just have to be incredibly patient and have a great deal of faith in what you're shooting, and that someday it's going to be important.
In terms of covering the chronology of it all, how did you decide that? Because we see several fights. How did you decide the chronology of what was going to pop in that way?
Right. Well, I mean, at first we had a 2.5-hour rough cut that had probably a lot more fights than ultimately ended up in the film. Really, the film is about Dmitriy's growth and his maturation in the boxing world as a religious Jew, as a Russian immigrant, and so really that's what ultimately shapes the film and its timeline and the major events in the film, is how do we show the major moments that affected this growth. And so there's certain fights that maybe didn't play as big of a part in that in that arc or in that timeline. And you can't include everything, which is a shame, but it's an 82-minute film, and when we had it 2 hours, if we'd showed the 2-hour version, people probably would have gotten bored with certain scenes. Boxing enthusiasts probably not.
DVD.
Those all become DVD extras. It's funny because on the wall in my office, there's more scenes that are cut out of the film than there are in the film. And that's just sort of that's the price of making this kind of documentary film. But yeah, hopefully it all ends up on DVD extras.
You described earlier the shock that some fans have when Dmitry is hit in the ring. Talk a little bit about that, your experience. When did you first experience what boxing was going to be like for him and for you and him in that sense?
Well, when I first went into the boxing gym, it was the first time I'd really ever gone into the gym to watch people training was in October 2002. And I wasn't so much worried about people getting hit. People had their protective gear on, and they were using the bigger gloves in the ring. But it was so colorful, and the relationship between the trainers and the boxers was so rich, and it just blew me away. It didn't matter where you pointed your camera in the boxing gym, you were going to get something interesting. And, that's, as a documentary filmmaker, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to go into an environment that I've never been, and that probably most people have never been, and I want to pull something out that would allow people to learn from it. And I'm learning from it as I'm shooting, and therefore when I show it, like at a film festival or wherever, that those people are going to learn as well, because it was new to me and it's going to be new to them. And so everything was new. As far as Dmitry and the sort of vulnerability of being a boxer, I mean, it happens all the time. I mean, I've seen him in tough sparring sessions. With former world champions at Gleason's gym or at Red Brick Gym in Newark, New Jersey, or in Starrett City Boxing Gym. There's all kinds of great fighters. And, I mean, every day, that's sort of also what I was trying to show in the film, that, like, people, even if you think, oh, he's only fought 3 times this year, how many other real fights did he have in the gym, in preparation, in sparring sessions? I mean, he's still going 6, 8, 10 rounds in sparring sessions, and these guys will spar full length pretty much fights 3 or 4 times before their main event, their big fight, in the course of in their training camp. So the day in, day out training and preparation that these guys go through, like Dmitry, is just incredible.
You see that there's that sequence where he spits blood into the cup at the end.
Right.
So that sums up part of that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that sequence is, Dimitri's driving in the car and he's talking about how frustrated he is that he's not fighting in New York, and then we see him at the gym and he's got a tough sparring session and he's bloodied his lip and he's spitting blood, and then he's at home and he's watching Costa versus Ricky Hatton, and this is all a part of the grind of being a professional boxer. Nothing comes easy, and every day you're working incredibly hard, and sometimes it doesn't come at all.
Were you aware of the fact that in some ways you're trying to refine boredom, actually? Take the tedium that's in boxing and make it entertaining? Yeah,
that's really hard. I mean, it's really hard I think in film to show stagnation in an interesting way that doesn't just completely bore the audience to tears. So how do you show people that, you know, there's times in his career and in the film that we show in the film that things aren't happening. So how do you kind of show that without making people yawn or putting them to sleep? So that's definitely a delicate sort of storytelling device. How do you show that? But yeah, I mean, that's what the film is also trying to show from beginning to end, from Dmitry driving in the car, from his daily, his daily routine of praying, running on the beach, and going to the boxing gym, lifting weights, going to the boxing gym, going off to a fight in Las Vegas, having that glory, and then you return to the boxing gym, you return to the beach, going to the Poconos, running on the road in the morning, sparring in the afternoon. You know, this is how boxers live their lives, and that's what the film is trying to show to a certain extent. Is like, it's Dmitry's incredibly unique, but it's showing a really behind the scenes look at what the day-to-day life is of a boxer.
Yes, Dmitry, a couple of things. You're a bit of a historian about boxing, right?
Yes, I follow a history of boxing very closely.
If you watch like the boxing register, the book of the Boxing Hall of Fame, you see that a lot of the early boxers, Sugar Ray Robinson, 175 fights. He fought over 200 fights. Do you ever miss not being involved in the era where boxers actually boxed practically every other week or something like that? 20 times a year?
I mean, that certainly was a very rich era of boxing. One of the things that happened back in those days was that fighters turned professional a lot sooner. So today what you have is fighters having many more amateur fights before they turn pro. I had 60 amateur fights. Many guys have 200 amateur fights. So it kind of, so to say, hopefully balances the fact that you don't stay as busy in a ring as a professional. But I mean, that was a great time and a great era of boxing talent, and a lot of great fighters, Hall of Famers came during that time, and certainly it was a very sweet time for the sweet science. So I hope as of today there's a lot of talent in my division, and I hope that we can recreate some of those rivalries and make boxing exciting in this weight division.
Could you take your hat off? Because it cast a shadow, I think, actually.
I rather keep it on, actually.
Oh, yeah, okay. You can put it a little bit, yeah, just because the lighting is just...
Do you want to switch seats?
Yeah, sure. That would be good. Okay, that would be fine.
Yeah.
Just of course, the lighting
yeah, absolutely.
shadowing the face. Actually, you like hats, actually, don't you?
I do like hats, yes.
You like hats?
Yes.
Most Americans don't wear hats. You're a hat person.
I'm from Odessa.
Talk about being a hat person.
Talk about being a hat person. A lot of the times I like to keep my head covered. I actually.
No, the mic. You're fine.
Okay.
Just a little bit.
Is that good?
That's right.
Yeah, a lot of I like to keep my head covered. I don't keep it covered all the time, but I do like to keep it covered. And I'm not at a level yet where I wear a yarmulke, but for all sakes and purposes, a hat and a yarmulke serve the same purpose. So I'm comfortable with wearing a hat, and that's what I wear.
How you developed that? How did you come to do that?
Come to wearing a hat?
Yeah, wearing a hat. Yeah.
Well, I guess sometimes when I go to the synagogue and I don't have my yarmulke, or if I got it at home or whatever, you can have a hat and it, so to say, serves the same purpose. So I guess in certain areas where when I would go out of the synagogue and I didn't feel comfortable with my head being uncovered, I would put on a hat, and I guess actually part of morning training, when you run, you have on a hat. So I don't know, just kind of bit by bit it grew, and I feel comfortable in the hat. So
one of the reasons I ask it, let me just get back for a second. One of the reasons I ask it is I have this. I'm a baseball fan too, and I have this picture of Braves Field in 1914, and it's an aerial shot down into the grandstand. Or a bunch of fans watching a Boston Braves game, and every single guy in that crowd has a hat.
They either have a derby or a straw hat. Without exception, there's not one uncovered head. They're all men, virtually all men, and they all have hats. And now, sociologically, you look at that and say, in America today, if you were to reproduce that, people would be startled, even if they wouldn't know why they were startled.
It's very, very funny. How did you describe meeting Jimmy for the first time? How old were you?
I met Jimmy when I was 13 years old. Jimmy's the director of the Starrett City Boxing Club. I remember that when I walked into the gym, I believe it was sometime during the week, and a man handed me an application. No, a man told me, one of the organizers of the gym told me, come back on Monday and we'll give you the application. And as I was walking out of the gym, I saw Jimmy O sitting outside by the gym. It was in the summertime, and he said, come inside, let me give you the application, fill it out tomorrow so that you can start training. And you know, Jimmy was not my trainer from the beginning. He was just kind of overseeing, and our relationship grew bit by bit. And after about a year of me being in the gym, he kind of took me over and really started to be my mentor and my trainer. And you know, Jimmy and I have become great friends. And I say this just to express my friendship with him. Is that, you know, if for whatever reason I would stop boxing today, we would still, you know, call each other and go to each other's houses and still be friends, meaning that boxing doesn't necessarily bind our friendship. You know, our relationship has grown outside of that. And you know, Jimmy's a great man, and I'm responsible for a lot of my success is responsible to Jimmy.
Did you feel like you were a natural from the beginning, or did it come, when you were 13, or did it come tough for you? Some people have a natural affinity for it, and other people it's hard.
I felt that I had a natural drive for it, and I did feel that I had a certain amount of talent, but I had to work very hard to achieve my goals. I mean, at that time in Starrett City, it had one of the best junior amateur teams in the country. So I got a chance to train with all of them. It was initially it was a very high level to start with, to train with all those guys. So I had to really, really work hard and so to say, really climb up that ladder very quickly. And you know, to people that it's very easy to stay motivated when you train, when everything goes well. But there are days when things don't go well. And two people that really, really believed in me is Jimmy and my older brother, who you get to see in the film. His name is Michael. Yeah. So you know, Jimmy and my brother always instilled in me the fact that I'm going to be a world champion. I'm going to be a great boxer, and I have the potential to accomplish a lot of great things. So, you know, that for a young kid growing up, it's very, very important. For anyone, it's very important, but especially for a young kid, it's very important that there's someone to believe in him and someone to nurture and rekindle a fire in him. So, you know, that helped me greatly, and I would spend hours talking on the phone with Jimmy after training about boxing and about the philosophy of boxing and about becoming a champion.
What's the big difference between a tough amateur fight like at the Olympic level and a beginning pro fight? I know there are big differences. What's the difference like for you as a fighter? I mean, when you fight at the highest level of the amateurs, the Golden Gloves and the Olympics, versus your pro debut.
Well, when you fight at the highest level of amateur boxing, you essentially are fighting future world champions and future top contenders. So you're fighting a very high level of technically a very high level of boxing. The difference in professional boxing is that you don't wear headgear, your gloves are smaller, you don't have a shirt on, so it's more physical. But technically speaking, the early pro fights are a lot easier than some of the amateur fights that you have, than all the amateur fights that you have on a higher level, because you're really fighting guys that are very, very good fighters, and you know, some of the guys that I fought are world champions now and top contenders, and so essentially when you turn pro, if you were a good amateur, and you have to make a transition into a lot of amateurs don't make a transition into professional boxing because it's more physical, But if you do make the transition, you really kind of walk over some of the initial opponents, because you're used to a much higher level of fighting than the guys that you fight starting out.
How did you get yourself used to the more physical side of the pros?
You know, it's mentally it's a tough thing, because you know, fighting with smaller gloves, and I remember they were one of my first three professional fights. My first two fights were first round knockouts, and my next fight I stopped the guy in the fourth round, but I got hit a little bit, and I remember getting hit with the smaller gloves, and it's a complete different feeling to being hit in the gym or to being hit in an amateur tournament where you have headgear and bigger gloves, and I couldn't believe it's a different pain threshold. You know, it's a different feeling. You know, initially you get touched with a little shot to the body and it hurts. Your ribs hurt, your body hurts. So it's really and eventually your body adjusts, but it's a mental cycle that you have to go through, and you have to adjust, and you have to be mentally very tough, and really decide that this is what you want to do, and decide that you're a warrior, and yet you have to. And the most important thing is to put your body through hell when you train, so that it's ready for all that can happen at the fight.
Yeah, one of the things I'm aware of is that boxing is such a mental game, and yet when you experience that pain for the first time in the ring, how do you keep the mental focus while you're dealing with the physical thing?
Well, the mental focus, you just have to, you know, kind of. I personally focus on my goals and focus on what I want to achieve, and you know, every great fighter has to go through that kind of an adversity. I remember, it's funny now, it wasn't funny then. I remember, I think it was my 7th or my 8th professional fight. I was winning it pretty easily, but I believe it was in the last round. I got thumbed in the eye, and that usually doesn't happen in amateur boxing. And I actually saw 3 people in front of me, and I remember that Jimmy told me, I don't know if he told me that jokingly or seriously, but he said, you know, if you see 2 people, just hit the one in the middle. So I was thinking to myself, just hit the one in the middle. And you know, thank God that I got through that round and I won the fight. But you know, these are just some of the things that you have to deal with as a pro fighter. That's why it's, you know, it's very mental, and you have to be mentally tough. You have to kind of turn off your emotions and not feel pity and sorry for yourself, because it's not going to help you in the ring.
Describe the Montano fight. The only time you got a draw, basically. I think you were knocked down twice in the first round.
Yes.
And then went on to essentially to win the rest of the fight. If
Right.
You wouldn't have gotten the draw. Talk about what that experience is like.
That was a tough period in my life. I actually went into that fight having a flu, and I had to lose 15 pounds in 2 weeks, which really, really drained me. You know, it was there are certain times where you don't want to be in a ring, meaning that you realize that it's not your night, and I realized that before the fight. I didn't know that Montano would be a tough opponent as he was, because I wasn't given much footage on him. So I thought that it would just be kind of another day at the office, and it wasn't. And besides that, I have shown to have a good jaw. I fought some guys that are tougher punches than Montana, and I've taken those punches well. But because I wasn't 100%, you know, I got dropped twice in the first round. It was a shock to me. But talk about, you know, mental strength. I gathered myself and I pulled out the best that I could on a day when I had 10% of my ability. So, you know, hopefully, after that fight, Montana beat a top 10 rated fighter. So, you know, even though I wasn't 100%, but Montana is a very good fighter, and it's just one of the things that you have to take as a learning experience. and you know, you live and you learn. And thank God I walked out that evening still being undefeated.
Now, some fighters talk and some commentators talk about how the first round you size up the opponent.
Yes.
To what extent do you do that? Because I know in some cases you finished off opponents really quickly, very directly. In other cases it goes 10 rounds and it's a decision. How quickly do you know where that's going to go? And how do you adjust to that mentally and otherwise?
Well, you know, as a professional, 10, 12 rounds is a long time. So, you know, I normally like to take the first round or two to kind of figure my opponent out and see his movements, see his rhythm, see what he's doing, and see his speed and kind of adjust to all of that. But you know, it all depends. I mean, if I fight someone that's not a good fast starter and I have to jump on them, then I jump on them. But you know, they say in pro boxing, they say the fight doesn't start until the third round. So I guess that's the case with me sometimes.
I love the Hoffman fight where you knock this guy out and then he comes back and talks to you later. It's a very sweet moment, which shows a lot of what people say boxing is really like inside for the fighters.
Yeah, I mean, boxing, I mean, it's a sport inside the ring, and after the fight is over, you know, you guys are friends and you have a respect for each other. You know, even when guys, you know, curse and scream at each other before fights and do all kinds of crazy stuff, once the fight is over, it's over. I mean, it's all competitive fury and competitive anger, but once the fight is over, it's over, and you guys, you know, can go have a drink and be best of friends. You should, especially if, you know, the tougher the fight, the more respect you should have for one another. So boxing is a sport. It's not there's nothing to it but a sport. And
talk about your personality in and out of the ring. You talk about that different personality, and I know that's true. I've watched it with other fighters.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely have to change yourself and turn off some emotions and turn on others when you get into the ring. That's why going away to training camp and isolating myself from my family, from my friends, helps me get into that mode. You know, waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning when you want to sleep, and training when you don't want to train, helps you become motivated and competitively angry to take care of business. So, you know, it's a mental edge that's very important, and being that I like boxing history, I've learned from some of the great fighters of the past that knew how to psych themselves up, and it's essential and very important.
One of the things that's frustrating about boxing, I know, for the fighters, in baseball, everybody plays everybody. The Yankees play the Devil Rays, and everybody they play the Mets. But you don't get to play the Mets necessarily. You may have to always fight the Devil Rays. Talk about the frustration of that, and how do you make something happen for yourself where you get the right opponent?
Yeah, the business of boxing can be extremely tough, and as I've said at the panel yesterday, that essentially until you become a world champion and until you become a star, you are at the mercy of your promoter to give you the opportunities to let you get there. So it could be an easier road, or it could be a very tough road. I feel that I have not been presented with a lot of opportunities that I feel that I deserve. So as of today, the guy that's a world champion in my weight class is
Ricky Hatton?
Ricky Hatton actually is considered the best fighter, but he doesn't have a title. The guy that's a champion is Gavin Reese from England, and he's a WBA champion. I'm ranked number 3 in WBA. So I'm not sure how hard my promoter is trying to get me that fight. So I try to take it into my hands, and I go to the boxing media and to the websites and to the English media, and I just try to call them out. I won my shot at the title. I'm willing to go to England to fulfill my American dream of becoming a world champion and bringing the belt back to Brooklyn. So all I need is opportunity, and I hope that it'll happen.
Do you feel now that you're a Brooklyn-centered fighter? I know that was an issue that comes up in the fight, because originally most of your pro fights didn't take place in New York, and so you were a New York fighter that maybe nobody knew in New York.
Well, people knew me in New York because of the Golden Gloves and because of my amateur career, but once I turned pro, people were anxious to see me, and in the beginning, nothing came to fruition. You know, I think that Lou did a good job of getting that initial step of let me fight in New York, Lou, my current promoter, but he failed. He failed tremendously in getting me to the next level, and so to say combining the past and the current. And you know, when I started out, when I was signed with Top Rank, I fought on all those big, huge cards in Las Vegas. So, I mean, so overall, in the beginning, it was very good to work up that fan base in New York City and to make it grow. But then it kind of stagnated, and Lou has not managed to progress me from that level, unfortunately.
The thing about making weight, that's something as boxers get older, I know that becomes a real problem. It's dramatized nicely in the film in a couple of places where you have to make that very specific weight, contract weight. Talk about how hard that is. And do you really fast at times? What do you do?
Making weight is probably the hardest part of boxing. It can be a real tough experience. I mean, you really have to watch what you eat and what you drink, and I mean, leading up to the fight, you know, making weight is a great task, and I've discussed that with Jason before the film. That is a big deal, and I think that he reflected it very well. And Jason was present there many times when I had to lose those last few pounds. In a steam bath, or jumping rope, eating chicken with asparagus. So you know, I think that he showed it well in the film, and I'm glad that people get to see and understand it. I mean, everyone goes through that. Most guys go through that, and you know, the plan is when you become a world champion, you move up to the next weight class.
But you can't lose the weight and then become weak or dehydrated, right? That's a real danger. Have you ever had that problem?
Well, you do become dehydrated, because the weigh-in is the day before the fight, and you do dehydrate yourself somewhat, and then after the weigh-in you rehydrate yourself and eat the right kind of foods to replenish your strength, and I hope to be strong enough for the fight. But it's a very fine process of making weight and of replenishing your body to feel good and to feel strong. And you know, when you're sick or when you're not feeling 100% physically, it's making weight can be a very tough, unhealthy process. So it's important to eat healthy and to take care of your body so that you feel strong and good for the fight.
What do you consider your toughest opponents so far in your best fights? The fights that you look back on, you see them on video, or you just a memory of them. What was the toughest challenge for you? What were your best fights and your best opponents?
The toughest opponent is probably myself, in the sense that, you know, you have to overcome yourself to make yourself train and to make yourself eat chicken breasts instead of French fries, and all that kind of stuff. I think that the last fight that you see in the film is probably one of the highlights. At that point in time, the guy that I fought was Sean Gallegos. He was 15-1 as a professional at that point in time, and he was a very accomplished fighter. He's actually from New Mexico, and he was a fellow prospect like myself. So, you know, I felt very motivated for that fight. That fight was for a title, and you know, I felt that I had to perform well in order to move on to bigger and better things. You know, thank God that it worked out well and I did perform well. But I can't say that I moved on to bigger and better things, because.
What was the turning point in that fight?
I mean, from the first round, I knew that I had the fight, and even in the film, when you see some of the moments where he hits me, it was just kind of me, I was never hurt. I was never in any kind of trouble. I was always in complete control. I was just kind of, it was all part of the beginning, so to say, analytical stage. And then once I was ready to take care of business, I was ready to take care of business. And he had he had no shot in that fight. But he did come to fight, and he showed a lot of heart. He took a lot of punishment. And you know, him and I keep in touch, and he's one of my buddies on MySpace. So
Talk about a couple more technical things. I want to talk about the relationship that you have with Jason. I try to get as much as I can.
are you making a documentary?
I don't get a chance to talk to the first-class athlete.
This is great. I mean, it just seems like, have we gone over an hour yet?
Oh, it's 40 minutes. 40 minutes and 37 seconds.
Wow.
I have an
He
hour.
never used to answer this quickly.
I have an hour
Great.
on these
No,
reels.
of course.
You want to fill them out because at some point
This
you'll
is
put
great.
else on it.
This is great.
Yeah. Defensively, I'm a big fan of Jason Litzow.
Jason Litzow, yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
He's an amazing fighter.
he is.
Yeah.
I know Jason for I know Jason for 11 years. We were in the Junior Olympics together.
Oh, talk a little bit about him.
Jason Litzow is an awesome fighter. He is, I think, one of the top prospects, completely underestimated because people think, you know, he's a white boy from Minnesota, so that he's underestimated. But Jason is the man. Jason is awesome. He comes and trains actually in Star City Boxing Club once in a while. And Jason and his brother Alan are both great guys. Much success to them, and I think that Jason is a future world champion.
Now, I want to talk a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about Jason. With Johnny Nalesko, he got caught in the 7th round, and he came back from that. And that was a great turnaround. With Jose Hernandez, that didn't happen. He got knocked out in the 8th round. Well, he clearly was ahead on all the counts. And it talks about the fighter with defense and the fighter who emphasizes attack. Talk about it. Analyze it in terms of him, and then talk about it in terms of yourself. What that means.
Well, you know, Jason is Jason. I mean, I guess, you know, most people in boxing come from some kind of a rough background, and Jason comes from a rough background. He fights very passionately, and even though he has a lot of skills, and I actually spoke about this with his trainer, Bob Van Sickle. He has a lot of skills. He has tremendous boxing ability, but sometimes he throws that to the wind, and he just wants to he wants to slug it out. And I think that being that Hernandez was his first fight on HBO, he wanted it to be exciting because he wanted to be back on HBO, and you know, unfortunately, he kind of put away his boxing ability, and he slugged it out, and he got caught and he got knocked out. But Jason is a very talented fighter, and I believe that with the right matchmaking and hopefully the right motivation, he's gonna come back and he's gonna be in the top of the division. Jason is awesome.
What lessons do you learn from that, and how different are your styles? You're more balanced defensively and offensively, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, sometimes a lot of people say that when I have a guy hurt, that I'm too cautious. But you know, when a fighter is hurt, he's like a cornered cat, meaning that he bites his hardest and scratches. He bites and scratches his hardest. So you know, I'm cautious to the point that I have to be, and I take into consideration that the other guy is a professional boxer, and he is you know, been training to hurt the people that he's fighting. So I systematically and technically break my opponents down, and when it's time for them to get knocked out, that's when I
bring that up in part because when you're watching the fight with Nalesko clearly missed his chance. He knocked Jason down. He almost hit him with a second punch, which might have finished the fight. And then he had the end of that round, the 8th round, to win, and he didn't win. He missed his opportunity, his moment. So, keeping with what you've just said, how do you keep from missing your moment? You know, when you've got somebody in a situation where that moment will pass, and the rhythm of fight will go the other way. Right.
Well, I mean, you know, sometimes it depends if you knock somebody down with one punch or with a flurry. If you knock somebody down with a flurry, you know, there's a good possibility that you've spent all your fuel, and that you have to kind of wait it out and wait till you get your wind back. So, you know, that could have been something that happened at that fight. But you know, Johnny Nalesko fight was one of the great fights on ESPN, and I think that it did a lot of great things for Jason. Um, and you know, I'm sure that he learned from them, and he's going to be more cautious and more defensive-minded. And I'm almost certain that he'll be back, and he's going to do great.
I am too. And one more question, technically. You are known for throwing punches that are very direct. And I know you know the fight analysts always talk about that. Manny Stewart and others always talk about that. Some big guys throw these curving punches, which don't have to say. In fact, you can see them coming. You're very direct in your attack. Talk about how you've refined that, because it's obviously the right style, I think, for you in general. But it's not so easy to get there.
Right. Well, I mean, you know, that comes. My technique comes from the fine teachings of Jimmy O and trainings that I've been in of Starrett City Boxing Club. You know, Starrett City Boxing Club is one of the greatest gyms in the country. It produced a lot of talent, a lot of world champions, a lot of great fighters, and from a young kid, I got the opportunity to be around all those great fighters. And New York City is a melting pot of boxing, and you know, I've been from a young age, I've been side by side with you know, Zab Judah, Shannon Briggs, all those guys, Junior Jones. I mean, all the world champions that come from New York City, and you see the great stuff that they do, and you see the things that they shouldn't do or whatever, and you learn and you pick up from that, and you hope that it influences you. And I think that it has influenced me tremendously. And you know, Louis Collazo and Joe Green and Curtis Stevens, these are guys that we're all the same age. We grew up together, and now, you know, Louis is a world champion, the other guys are world ranked fighters. So, you know, we boxed each other for many years, and it's just it's tremendous education, and I'm grateful to Starrett City Boxing Club for providing me with that.
Collaboration. Talk about how that worked, because I mean, you know, the filmmaker and the star, and it really worked. And how did that work? When did you realize it was working so well, and what kind of feedback did you get?
Should I start?
Yeah. Just talk to me a little bit.
Well, as Jason mentioned earlier, he's contacted the Chabad rabbi, and my rabbi told me, he said this someone from this college called you, wants to do a documentary for a week. and you know, initially I met Jason, and you know, you get a lot of these different requests from different people, and some of them certainly don't take as seriously as this, and you know, first it was a week, then it was 2 weeks, and you know, the great accomplishment of Jason is that I and Jimmy and everyone in the crew, so to say, felt comfortable around him, and he really truly became a fly on the wall. And it's very difficult to become that, especially when you have a camera. So, you know, Jason was completely non-intrusive, kind of super laid back. When he did want to inquire about something, he was, you know, very understanding and, so to say, very sensitive to our issues and to our needs, and you know, and we respected him for that. And you know, the greatest compliment that I can give him is that Jason and I are friends now, and we're gonna be friends. So, as a filmmaker, essentially, I think that the fact that I guess it has to do with his personality, that he was able to be respectful and I guess restrain himself in certain ways, and really he truly became a fly on the wall. And seeing some of those scenes, I didn't even realize that I said some of those things and that they were on camera, because it didn't seem that they were, you know, it just seemed like a home video. And it's, you know, much credit to Jason for that.
I'll say a couple things, I guess. I think one thing is that when I started with Dmitriy, I mean, it wasn't long before. I mean, within the first few weeks, there were other TV reporters there shooting stories on Dmitriy. You know, most of them were, you know, little segments for probably sports in New York. I think someone came down from Canada, someone came in and did a Reuters piece. And the difference between them and me was that they came in with their lights. They came in and said, turn off the radio. You know, they created a big presence, which is just sort of the way, I guess, television news works. But anytime you do that, you know, as a documentary filmmaker, some people do that. Some people come in with big boom microphones. I don't do that. So, you know, and I could have asked them to turn off the radio. I mean, every boxing gym in the world has a big boom box where they're playing the music, because that gives the fighters, you know, the rhythm, and they constantly hear that. It gives them the motivation.
You have to worry about whether you can pay for that music.
Yeah, I gotta worry if I can pay for that music. And, you know, miraculously,
That's why 50 Cent and Big
I mean, miraculously, it wasn't as big of an issue as it could have been. But the point I'm trying to say is that I came there, and also in the beginning, I didn't ask anything of them, and I think that was an advantage. And you asked about how did you know the collaboration was working. Jimmy can be a little grouchy. I mean, he's 80 years old. It's his gym. Dmitriy admitted that he didn't know I was going to be there for more than a week. Either did Jimmy. Jimmy would keep asking me probably every couple months that I'd come back, and he'd say, when are you going to be finished with this thing? You know, 5 years later, I'm finished with this thing. And he says, where are you? Well, how come I haven't seen you? But the point being that, you know, I came in there and I didn't ask Dmitriy to do things. And, you know, when it's just, to me, it's ridiculous when people would come in and say, you know, let's see you punch the bag, or like, can you do this? Can you do that? I mean, as a documentary filmmaker, I mean, I was never interested in any of that stuff. So I think that was probably made Dmitriy and Israel and Jimmy and everyone else in the gym comfortable, because you're also talking about, it wasn't just like a vacuum where it was me shooting Dmitriy. I mean, I was in a boxing gym with other amateur and professional fighters, people with personalities and lives, and you know, they don't want me to be running into them or telling them to turn off the radio. I mean, who the hell am I to do that, right? So I think that helped the whole process, and that I told Jimmy, I'm just going to be here. I'm just going to be shooting. I'd shoot the other boxers. I was equally as interested, you know, in the beginning of the film. There's even like, I mean, there's a short montage of these other young fighters shadow boxing and training. I mean, I was interested in everyone there, and I get to know them, and I think that helped. And what also made me realize that things were going well is when eventually, after the first few fights, Dmitriy said, you know, you're part of the crew. And as any sort of journalist or filmmaker or documentary filmmaker will tell you, I mean, it's kind of like you don't want to be a part of the crew. You don't want to have a presence, because you don't want, unless you're like, you know, Hunter Thompson or something like that, and you're writing yourself into the story, or Bill Plimpton, George Plimpton. Like, there's that, but this was not that. But just the fact that Dmitriy said I was part of the crew meant to me that I was in, that I had the trust of my subjects, that it was okay for me to be in the dressing room before the fights. You know, I had access that Dmitriy didn't want to give to other people. He didn't want he never, I mean, he still today doesn't allow photographers into his dressing room before fights. And I can understand that. And the fact that he would let me be there, and that it wouldn't cause him, he wouldn't even think about it, I mean, is amazing. So, I mean, that's the goal of every filmmaker, documentary filmmaker, is to earn the trust of your subjects to the point where they don't even think about that you're even around.
And actually, after the movie was over, after Jason stopped filming, and some of those fights, I didn't see Jason there with the camera. Kind of made me feel awkward, because when I was seeing with the camera, it kind of would hype me up, and it was actually difficult getting used to that. So now I tell him, when I have a big fight, you have to come back, even if it's yeah.
I noticed I started following Jason Hutt's fights on ESPN when I could, and I started to, even though I hadn't met him yet, I started getting an emotional identification, and I actually started worrying about him in certain fights, the Velasco fight, coming up to the Hernandez fight. You must feel that with Dmitriy, and also what would have happened if one of those fights had gone the other way.
Yeah.
Not only does it affect your film, but it affects your whole relationship.
Yeah, someone asked me last night. They said, "Well, were you ever worried while you were shooting, like what would happen if he lost or something bad happened?" Well, first of all, at most of his fights, I would start shoot. I was able to gain permission from the promoter not to shoot the actual ring and the fight, but I was able to be in the arena, and that's one of the things I think that's great about. I appreciate about my film is that, you know, most of the time, you know, ESPN, HBO, they own, you know, in a boxing match, you're only on the boxing match. In the NFL and Major League Baseball, In NBA, like, you get crowd shots, you get crowd reactions, and in boxing you don't get that unless it's a fiction film, you know, because the action is all in the ring and you can't afford to cut away from the ring. But I was able to do that, and so the truth is that in most of Dmitry's fights I wasn't watching. You know, I mean, I was shooting Jimmy or Oscar Suarez or Hector Roca. I was shooting the trainers. I was shooting Israel in the crowd. I was shooting some of Dmitry's friends, his brother reacting to the fights, and I'd follow along by the audience reaction. But since the funny thing is yes, since I stopped shooting and had that sort of wall between me and him, which is the camera. It's hard. It's definitely hard to go to the fights and watch Dmitry and just cheer for him as a fan. And because, like you said, you do start to care about the people. You know, I've gotten to know Dmitry. I care about him. I hope he does well. And so, yeah, it's definitely difficult. I wouldn't say there was a very strong an emotional connection during the making of the film, because I did have my camera between me and him. But once you put that camera away, you know, then it's just, there's nothing between you, and so it becomes a lot stronger.
It's that whole question of if we pick up the camera, if you and I both pick up cameras because we're observers as opposed to participants in life. I mean, that's something that filmmakers and journalists always have to think about. And when you get close to the subject, like, you know, you get really close to your subject, you wonder about that.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of times the camera helps people. I mean, if you're bashful, obviously there's films like Sex, Lies, and Videotape where, you know, like which is a good exploration of the things you can do with a camera that you can't do without it. And I think that in a sense it can be an entrance into certain worlds, because you feel like, you know, I'd never feel comfortable, let's say, going there to that boxing gym or wherever else you're shooting, but because I have a camera, you know, it's sort of a crutch, and it helps me gain access to a world that I didn't feel comfortable in. Or because I have a pencil and pad, I'm actually writing, you know, I'm doing research, so you can do that. But for me, I mean, it was more just having the camera does sort of give you an emotional buffer, for sure.
Dmitry, what's your favorite moment in the film, and for whatever reason? It maybe not be a moment I would think is obvious, but what really works for you, makes you so happy is there?
My favorite moment in the film is towards. I mean, I guess I have a few favorite moments, but I think it's funny to me now, and I think it's a great scene when I weigh in, and Hector starts speaking Spanish, and he gives me the whole speech, and then he talks to Jason. It's an interesting moment to me, because it kind of really sums up his personality.
Is that when the trainer walks out in his flip-flops?
Yes.
I love that.
Yeah, that was a great scene. That was great, and you know, I was really, you know, he kind of stressed me out at that point in time. But it worked, and then I made weight.
Like your mother, basically.
Yeah. And, you know, that's the trainer's job. You know, it's responsibility. Different trainers project themselves in a different kind of way, and you know, Hector is very vocal about what he's feeling and what he wants, and he definitely made it known.
Have you ever thought what it would be like to have Manny Stewart or Teddy Atlas train you? These high-profile trainers, and not to suggest they need that, but you know.
I mean, you know, Emmanuel Stewart and Teddy Atlas are great trainers. I think Emmanuel Stewart, well, Teddy Atlas is not really an active trainer anymore. But Emmanuel Stewart is, I think, you know, he's a great cornerman, and he has a great eye for boxing. But I mean, Hector Roca is a high-profile trainer, as was Oscar Suarez. Is a high-profile trainer. I think that there are a lot of trainers out there that don't necessarily get the break and get the publicity, but they're all very good trainers, as good as the guys with the big names, or even better. And there's a lot of trainers out there that are not known to the public, that are really, really fine masters of the art. And you know, for example, Jimmy, you know, Jimmy's 82 years old now. It's hard for him to so to say, to go into professional boxing and make a name for himself. But you know, I mean, Jimmy was always leery of professional boxing because of all of its difficulties and business. So he never really went that route. But you know, I think had Jimmy decided to do that, he would have been right along there with all those guys.
Would you want to be a trainer yourself?
No, I would not.
So when you leave boxing, you leave boxing.
No, I wouldn't want to leave boxing. I would want to still be involved with it. Maybe, hopefully, you know, commentating or something like that, or be involved in a managerial or promotional side of it. But training is a certain talent, and it's not something that I would like to do. It's an art, and it's a difficult job. Most of the time, you know, good fighters don't make good trainers because they want to impose their style or the way that they fought on a fighter. So
I was just going to say one thing. You know, you're talking about the Emmanuel Stewart and Teddy Atlas, and I can at least say as someone who's been in gyms for the last few years, and you know, we were in Puerto Rico at the Wilfredo Gomez gym, and we were in LA at Wildcard Gym, where, you know, Freddie Roach's gym. It's a lot like maybe one thing I can compare it to is like a music producer. You know, some musicians create great music when producers are producing their albums, and I think it's similar with a lot of boxers. I mean, there's so many variables that goes into it that certain boxers work best with certain trainers, and whether it's Emmanuel Stewart, maybe Dmitry agrees, whether it's Emmanuel Stewart or Buddy McGirt, or it's really about who's teaching this fighter the right style and who connects to that fighter in a deep way and inspires him and motivates him to be their best. So, you know, a lot of these high-profile trainers, if they don't have the time to commit to a boxer, or if it's the wrong style they're instilling in them for whatever reason, I mean, it's all like chemistry, you know, it's alchemy.